Okay, I have been promising you episode 4 of my American Dope series, Cocaine Condor, for a long time, and it's pretty much edited, but I just never get around to finishing it, so I figured I'd give you a Freestyle Friday and talk about a lot of the things and touch on some South American and American history, since seem to enjoy me touching on some European history in my Ukraine story. So, first, let's start with Snowfall. So Snowfall, obviously, successful TV show that's purports to be about the idea that the U.S. government, through the CIA, purposely flooded America, specifically Black Los Angeles, with cocaine in the 1980s. This is based on the work of, I haven't watched that show other than in a few chunks. I'm not sure exactly what goes on in that show, but a little insider baseball. So Freeway Rick, very upset at John Singleton, who initially developed that show. Of course, he died recently, or a couple years ago, because he extensively interviewed Rick and never paid him anything. Probably got a lot of details of little incidents and just how the ambiance of the time and stuff was, and they didn't even bring him on the show as a consultant. Didn't throw him a bone at all. And so the show was set in the early 1980s. So let's talk about what's going on in the U.S. drug market as we start to ramp up into what became the so-called crack era. And then let's also talk about Central and South American politics and how these all came together to cause this little, I hate when people call it the golden age, but this era of on the streets of urban America where people made more money faster than any time. Not that, I mean, there's more drugs sold now and et cetera, but it was a much bigger overall part of the economy back then. I calculated in 1987 that the estimated value of cocaine sold in the U.S. was like 2% of the entire GDP. So, about 1979 or so, Jimmy Carter's, Surgeon General, I think he was, or some other, I think it was a Surgeon General, basically said cocaine was kind of harmless. It was described in the way that we would describe marijuana now, that it was a party drug, they weren't promoting using it, but it was harmless. And in the late 70s, as heroin use kind of temporarily dipped a little, marijuana actually became drug target number one. So you may remember from older people in your family talking about Panama Red or Acapulco Gold, high-grade marijuana strains coming in from Colombia in the late 70s. And so as the U.S. government became to focus on marijuana, and so these marijuana smugglers out of Colombia find out, like, okay, so there's more interdiction of the marijuana. We have to, obviously, it's way more bulky than cocaine. So at first, they were actually getting in less trouble for the cocaine than the marijuana. And if you look at some of my other documentaries, the Black DEA agent, I interview in a few of them, like in Roland and other things. John Sutton, who was undercover in Detroit in the early 70s, he actually retired as the head of the global marijuana desk for the DEA. He was in charge of all marijuana interdiction, and he talked about them being kind of perplexed at Jimmy Carter's White House, thinking that cocaine was kind of harmless and focusing so much on marijuana. So late 70s, Colombian marijuana growers and smugglers are starting to switch over to cocaine. South Florida is starting to get flooded, but obviously nowhere to near the degree it would. Now, let's go to the title of my documentary, Condor, Cocaine Condor. Where does the word condor come from? Well, there was something called Operation Condor, which wasn't an operation, it's an umbrella term for a whole lot of political operations and maneuverings and etc. It was a secretive initiative by the U.S., in a nutshell, to support right-wing governments in Central and South America so that they could protect U.S. business interests. So if you go back to the early 70s, say in Chile, which still has the highest per capita GDP of any country south of the border, when Allende, who was a socialist, came in as the president, through democratically elected means, the U.S. government supported Pinochet in his violent overthrow of Allende. Allende killed himself during the overthrow, but everyone thinks he was executed. And that's a prime example of, again, Condor and the U.S. supporting right-wing governments, and why, like I said, to protect U.S. business interests. Well, what does that exactly mean? So in Chile, as the largest example, you had a company called ITT. And ITT is, it's known as a multinational conglomerate. So it had mining interests. I think it had the Chilean telephone industry, but it had a lot of big copper mines. And they were nationalized under Allende. If you've heard the term nationalized, it simply means a government takes big businesses and makes them in control of the government, ostensibly to benefit the people. And that's whether you believe in that or not is a separate debate, but that's what it is, and that's what happened. So some U.S. companies were taken over, and that was a reason not for us to invade ourselves, but to support the overthrow of the democratically elected government of Allende, to support Pinochet. And of course, you may remember Pinochet about 10 years ago at the end of his life. He had been served as dictator of Chile from the early 70s, probably 2008 or 10 or something, and he was finally taken into custody in Spain for crimes against humanity, which was Los Desaparecidos, the disappeared ones. So in Chile, and especially in Argentina, again, another country that was part of Operation Condor, not anyone, but lots of people that were anti-government disappeared. So college students leave class, they're seen being dragged into a car, they're never seen again. I think it was a total scattered across the countries of maybe 40, 50,000 South Americans, many of them middle class, and intellectuals, though there was a killing of a lot of union people. So there's as I was doing Condor, a very unexpected thread started to run through it, of seeing how unionization was tied in, in an antithetical. It was part of this gumbo with the drug trade, which is kind of weird and surprising. But so in a country like Chile, the workers' movements are who elected Allende, who then nationalized companies like ITT, which then pressured the U.S. government to support an overthrow. So I have a clip up called The Real Illuminati, which is a clip from Cocaine Condor, and is about John McCone. John McCone served under Kennedy as the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, and then he went on to be, guess what, CEO of ITT, and then he was the head of the CIA, and then which one? Either he was the head of the CIA and then the president of ITT, or vice versa. But so when the overthrow was going on, Pinochet was on the phone with John McCone and the head of the CIA. So you have, I think McCone was at ITT. So you have the head of a huge American business, the biggest one in Chile, with an American intelligence official on the phone with a military dictator who's overthrowing a democratically elected government, which we purport to support as democracy. And this was all well documented. This was all on the record in Congress. This isn't some, theory. So Operation Condor. So that's Operation Condor in Chile. In Argentina, you have a similar thing going on. The economies of those countries down there, like Argentina in 1929, when the Depression hit the United States and the world, Argentina actually had a slightly higher per capita GDP than the United States. It had its own internal auto industry. All of these big countries in the New World were all kind of similar to the United States. Lots of European immigrants. Brazil had a lot of the African DNA, but Argentina, big country with very little indigenous or African DNA, mostly Italian, German, Spanish, and they were very much like the United States, but of course their fortunes diverged after World War II. And if anybody thinks that extreme, if just totally promoting business interest is what's absolutely best for the economy, well, the examples of those South American countries kind of shows otherwise. Argentina, suffered hyperinflation, went off the rails, so it had right-wing strongmen in charge, and they had their own program of disappeared ones in Cocaine Condor. I had Michael Levine, a DEA agent who I interviewed extensively. At one point, he had the most arrests of any undercover DEA agent in history, and he was running operations against, this is before Colombia became dominant. This is like 79, 80, when the Bolivians who supply the paste to the Colombians who would then turn it into powder, well, this is the Bolivians trying to cut the Colombians out as the business is starting to grow. Like I said, circa 1980, the Colombians aren't growing the cocaine, they're turning the Bolivian base into cocaine hydrochloride powder. So the Bolivians under, what was his name? The Bolivians, so Michael Levine is stationed in Buenos Aires, and he's running operatives that are giving him information, and this was pretty spooky. This is one of the spookiest drug stories. I have a clip of this up. I think it's called The Disappeared Ones. Levine is undercover in Buenos Aires. He's posing as a half Italian, half Puerto Rican, who's an emissary from the 5 families of the New York Mafia, and he's going to broker a huge ongoing deal with the Bolivian cocaine barons. And so the representative of the Bolivian government comes to see him in Buenos Aires. Well, the Argentine police were so bloodthirsty and corrupt, they were known for just murdering and robbing any drug dealers or lots of people that came in to their zone of operations at that time. And Levine knew that some Argentine police, who he actually was paying for information, he knew they were going to kill his Bolivian target. So he had to call him over to his apartment, and he said, listen, this guy so-and-so, you got to leave him alone. I'm working a case on him. And they're like, yeah, whatever, okay, fine. And then they ask him, do you want to come out with us tonight and pick some people up? So they were asking him, did he want to ride with them and participate in what later became what I referred to as the disappeared ones. They were going to go out and pick up political dissidents, middle-class Argentines, torture them, kill them. He took a pass, but what's so spooky is that this particular set of Argentine cops who Levine was trying to keep off from killing his Bolivian target. So Levine was in a DEA, so he had an office in the U.S. Embassy. So who else is in the U.S. Embassy? CIA has an office in the U.S. Embassy, and he said he would see the same guy sometimes in the U.S. Embassy building, but he wasn't seeing him that day, so he must have been going to see the CIA. So this guy was an Argentine cop. He was also getting paid secretly by the Argentine government to participate in this mass kidnapping, torture, and murder campaign against dissidents. And then he's also giving info to the US DEA and the CIA. So the idea of a low-wage cop in some country south of the border who's getting 4 different paychecks and is doing who knows what besides kidnapping and killing people. It's a chilling chilling thing to think about. So that's Condor in Argentina. So let's go up to, so that's Condor in Argentina. How many minutes are we at?
15, 14.
All right, I'm going to have to edit this one a little bit. So much to talk about in this one. Okay, so that's the backdrop in South America. I just want to touch on Central America, and then I want to talk about Freeway Rick and Snowfall and Gary Webb and Dark Alliance and etc. So you've heard the term the Contras. So in El Salvador, so you've heard the term the Contras. Well, up in El Salvador, which those of you that are into Bitcoin might have heard about issuing the volcano bonds now, and their Bitcoin's legal tender. El Salvador is a shell of a country, and the United States has a lot to do with that. It's overrun with MS-13 and 18th Street gang members. From where? From Los Angeles, LA, and then the early 90s started deporting a lot of Central American gang members who had been born in those other countries, and they took Los Angeles gang beefs to those countries. It's whole prisons now in El Salvador, Nicaragua will just be a MS-13 prison, an 18th Street prison. So anyways, in the late 70s, what year did it happen? Maybe 79, the communists overthrew the El Salvador's government. And this Contra movement started. Well, the Contras weren't really a movement. They were groups of individual businessmen who maybe had some political contacts in the United States. And at first, Ronald Reagan is sending some money down to support the Contras in their quest to overthrow and take back control of El Salvador. But in 1982, there's a congressional law passed, the Bolin Amendment, which in a nutshell makes it impossible for Reagan to legally send any money down to the Contras, because a president, hopefully you know this, presidents can't just spend what they want. President lays out to Congress what he wants to spend money on, and Congress says yay or nay. So 1982 is the key year when the Bolin Amendment passes. Cocaine usage and availability has been slowly picking up due to, like I said, the Colombians moving over to that, the Bolivians pushing. But in 82, Ronald Reagan and his CIA director, George Bush, are faced with the dilemma of they can no longer get Congress to issue any money to the Contras. So what are they going to do? Well, the cocaine business is growing. The Contras are sitting down there in El Salvador. You know, Central America connects North America to South America. It's you know, like Panama is a base for cocaine. It's the perfect thing. You want to raise money? You don't have to, like the CIA didn't have to per se move drugs themselves. You simply give get out of jail free cards in effect to people that tell you they're Contras. And Danilo Blandón, Rick Ross's eventual supplier up in LA, he was just a El Salvadoran businessman of some sort who got himself, he was able to get himself considered to be a Contra freedom fighter. And, you know, over the years, he seemed to have been able to operate with some degree of impunity. And, you know, he was one source of cocaine into the United States. The Colombians were sending it, the Bolivians were sending it. Freeway Rick was probably not even the biggest dealer in LA at the time. That distinction was probably held by Waterhead Bo Bennett. But Freeway Rick was integral in connecting the big cocaine loads to the streets to crack cocaine. Freeway Rick was called that because he lived near the 110 freeway. Now, as I've learned being here in LA, you know, it's a big city, but it's starting to get the lay of the land. The 110 freeway runs smack dab from downtown to Long Beach through the middle of South Los Angeles, South Central. And it actually, to residents of South Central, they consider that the dividing line between the east and the west side, not Central Avenue or something else that maybe the politicians do. But guess what runs, you know, like a basically a block or half block, like right next to the 110 freeway, is Hoover Street. So, of course, lots of Hoover gang sets up and down Hoover, and Freeway Rick was known for having crack houses basically at every exit up and down the 110 freeway. So if you're a drug customer, you just get on the 110, you get off basically anywhere, and it's drug activity all along the 110, which I'm sure was controlled or heavily controlled to some degree by different Hoover gang members. And probably, Hoover was probably, those Hoover guys were probably making so much money in the late 80s, partially as a function of their connection to Freeway Rick. That's why they had the power and the strength to break away and become Hoover criminals. And, that's part of LA gangland history. You can read more about that. But I thought that was interesting, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Freeway Rick is intimately connected with Hoover Street, which was this gang that were Crips that was so large they just kind of became their own entity, and most of them are that to this day. So, in El Salvador, these people are presenting themselves as Contras. Danilo Blandon is one. He's feeding Freeway Rick. And then what you also have going on, because of all these, because of Operation Condor, it's not so much that there's CIA actual agents, CIA operatives. And I had to learn the difference between those two words, and it's interesting, and it shows you how shady stuff really works. There's not that many CIA agents, and they're not probably going to commit a crime, or, not one you're going to trace them to. But a CIA operative is somebody who's not employed by the U.S. government. They could be a military official in another country. They could be a gangster in another country. And they could just get favors and protection in exchange for doing dirty work. They might not even know they're doing it for the CIA. In fact, they often probably didn't. And you have all these, well, not all these, you have a small set of highly skilled pilots like Barry Seal and a few others that are part of this melange down there in Central and South America. They've been smuggling guns involved with, say, the Bay of Pigs when Cuban exiles tried to overthrow Castro, with the Colombian marijuana trade, with things with Operation Condor, illegal weapons being brought down there, with Reagan sending weapons down to the Contras illegally. So you have this pool of pilots that are skilled enough to make these runs, and now the cocaine business is blossoming, and you have these protected people like some of the Contras who can grow their drug trade under this umbrella of protection afforded by the 1982 blocking of Reagan being able to send money legally through Congress. And that's when the smuggling pipeline, if you will, greatly expands. So you have the pilots and certain of these drug rings that have a couple-year period, really only like 82 to 84, where there's not that much interdiction in that area if you were one of the protected groups. You're associated with the Contras, or you were kicking money to the Contras. And that's when it explodes, huge influx. And by the time they try to get a lid on it, it was kind of too late. Though it's interesting, in 1984, when they kind of kicked the war against that back into high gear, because in 1984, Boland Amendment was taken away and Reagan was able to send money to the Contras legally. So then they started to crack down on some of the same people they had sort of been protecting, including Manuel Noriega, and they hit the Tranquilandia, which was the biggest cocaine lab bust. They start making it difficult to get ether. So you'll hear people talk about, how the cocaine changed in the mid to late 80s. Well, that says ether went off the market after Tranquilandia. Then it started to become more of that gummy, and people just wanted to cook it straight into crack, and you see the usage patterns changing on the street. So Then we have let's talk about Gary Webb and the Dark Alliance series, and he broke the story of the CIA's part in this very complex process. But I think because he wasn't, a hardcore crime per se journalist and didn't quite get how things worked, and he got caught up in the excitement and the hype of, he was a big media wonderkid and darling when that came out, and he allowed it to seem like the narrative was that the CIA made a plan to put cocaine in Black Los Angeles. The effect was the same, but it really was just whatever these Contras, whoever wants to do to make money to buy weapons, will facilitate that or look the other way for this brief couple 2-year period. And 82 to 84 is when you see the wholesale price of cocaine in cities like New York drop from 60,000 to 18,000 or something, and the production capacity goes way up in Colombia, Bolivia, and they can't, the cat is out of the bag and it can't really be stopped at that point. So, but there's no smoking gun of, cocaine passing through CIA agents or military officials' hands. Not to say it could have happened, but there's no smoking gun. But it doesn't really matter. Danilo Blandone, I don't think he was going to have meetings with the CIA about ruining America with cocaine, but what he could do is if he got in trouble with the DEA, which happened with him, he had phone numbers he could call where people above the DEA, people at the Washington, D.C. level associated with the CIA, could get him out of trouble. And if you're Freeway Rick or other guys that are copping from a guy like Blandone, if your plug can't get in trouble, well, guess what? You always have a plug, and, and eventually, as we know, Blandone set Freeway Rick up himself, and Rick got, I guess, life, and then got it knocked down to 10 years, and Freeway Rick is an entrepreneur here in L.A. now. He's in the marijuana business and some other stuff, so glad Freeway Rick is out. He has several documentaries he's done. You can check out his story. So, a lot of complicated South American and Central American politics. If you're interested in this stuff, just Google some of the phrases and some of the names that I mentioned. Operation Condor, the disappeared ones, Salvador Allende in Chile, the death squads in Argentina, and Danilo Blandone. And Gary Webb, of course, his Dark Alliance series broke this wide open. At first, so you had a lot of anger in the black community, especially in LA, of saying, well, wait a second, the CIA put cocaine here for us? Not exactly, but the effect was the same. They didn't care where it went and who it happened to. And, this is the place that was ground zero. And then the CIA was able to take that, the media machinations of the CIA were able to take that little subtle discrepancy between, the CIA let people they were working with ramp up the cocaine business versus the CIA itself, and then made Gary Webb out to be, a conspiracy theorist, and he ended up killing himself. Like more than a few people in these high-profile cases, journalists and witnesses, he killed himself with 2 shots. I guess that's possible. So go read the Gary Webb Dark Alliance series, and Cocaine Condor will be out sometime. So Freestyle Friday, I'll profit, American dough.